Good evening, I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Andrew is away tonight. A stark warning for Russia.
Russia must stop its nuclear saber rattling. This is dangerous.
NATO's show of military might ahead of an emergency meeting as Russia continues its assault.
The most difficult thing is to hear these voices and shootings.
And dozens of babies born to Ukrainian surrogates trapped in the war zone.
We just want our kid out. That's all we want.
The Canadian parents desperately trying to get their children home. Also tonight, COVID vaccines for young kids could be here by summer.
I think this is great news. It's another tool in our battle.
But are they still necessary? Heading back to the office full-time, more than half of Canadians say no thanks.
I think if we did put a mandate into place, we would lose people.
Why employees are now in the driver's seat. This is The National. The Prime Minister has arrived in Brussels along with leaders of other NATO countries. But even before the summit begins, NATO has already announced a major ramp-up to its deployments in Europe. Countries on NATO's eastern frontier will be home to multinational battle groups, a wall of firepower meant to make Russia think twice about taking its invasion of Ukraine deeper into Europe. NATO estimates that Russia has lost up to 15,000 troops in what is already the largest war the continent has seen in decades. As Ellen Morrow explains, NATO's announcement today included preparations for more than just conventional war.
NATO soldiers running drills in Norway, an exercise long planned, but in this perilous moment, it's taken on a new urgency. NATO is deploying 4 new battle groups to Eastern Europe, each with 1,000 to 1,500 troops, a response to Russian aggression that the West warns may only get worse. Heading to Brussels for the emergency NATO summit, President Joe Biden reiterated an ominous warning.
How are you concerned about the threat of chemical warfare right now, that Russia would use chemical weapons? How high is that threat?
I think it's a real threat.
And so NATO is sending Ukraine protective gear specifically for a chemical, biological, or nuclear attack.
Any use of chemical weapons would totally change the nature of the conflict. And it will be a blatant violation of international law.
As Ukraine hangs on militarily, the country fears that kind of attack is more and more likely.
It's just a matter of time. So what we have to do, we have to be strong enough to defend Ukraine.
Making Ukraine strong enough without triggering a wider war is NATO's daunting challenge. At the European Parliament, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau signaled the West should have countered Russia years ago.
We must ensure that the decision to invade a sovereign, independent country is understood to be a strategic failure that carries with it ruinous costs.
Western leaders will highlight their unity at the summit, but there will be difficult conversations on next steps. Ukraine's big ask has been the creation of a no-fly zone, but NATO leaders have already ruled that out, saying it would mean direct military confrontation with Russia. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Brussels.
Coming up a little later, I talk with 2 former NATO insiders about how Russia's invasion is changing the alliance and what that means for war and peace in Europe and beyond. A message is being sent to NATO from inside Ukraine tonight as Russia keeps up the attack. That message is coming not only from the president, but from the people. Susan Ormiston takes us there.
At noon, in front of the town hall, a ritual started the first day of the war and repeated every day since. Across the road, local soldiers join in, ready to confront the enemy.
Ukraina!
The town of 10,000 near Lviv and its mayor have a message for NATO leaders. NATO's done a lot, but not enough, the mayor says. Still, our children and cities are dying. He shows us the letter signed by his deputy sent to NATO in Brussels.
We have a letter to NATO with proposition to close the sky.
He means impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which NATO has rejected. We'll still be knocking on their doors. Russian attacks are battering Mariupol, a once thriving city reduced to rubble and ash. Humanitarian aid is scarce, an estimated 100,000 people still trapped, bodies buried in the streets. In Kiev, residents are being shaken by constant shelling and gunfire with the worst battles in the suburbs. But there are those who decide not to leave, like Olga Serdiak.
I can left my home in a difficult situation, my country. The most difficult thing is to hear these voices and shootings. And our situation is not in Kiev is not that bad as people in Mariupol.
As Ukraine moves into a second month of war, there is determined resilience, like in Pustomate, taking in moms and kids from bombarded cities, distributing donated goods, talk of plans after the victory, they say. But for now, a singular focus to help their country. Children sign the flag to send to the army. Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, will keep the world's attention squarely focused on Ukraine tomorrow when he speaks before that emergency summit at NATO by video link. He'll press again for more military support, enough to repel Russian air attacks, which now include long-range missiles. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Lviv.
In Afghanistan, the Taliban is breaking a major promise to secure education for girls. It will not reopen schools to girls past grade 6. The sudden announcement caught many off guard on the first day of the school year. Katie Simpson brings us the reaction from students and the calls for action. So we are having a few technical difficulties. Hang tight. We're just going to go to commercial, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Sorry for that quick dash to commercial. We were having some technical difficulties. Fingers crossed, all is okay right now, because we want to take you back to the story we were about to bring you. We're talking about Afghanistan. The Taliban is breaking a major promise to secure education for girls. It will not reopen schools to girls past grade 6. The sudden announcement caught many people off guard on, of course, the first day of the school year. Katie Simpson brings us the reaction from students and some calls for action.
In a country aching for a return to normal, the first day of a new school year had so much promise. Women and girls were assured by the Taliban they could pursue an education past 6th grade, with classes resuming for the first time since the fall of Kabul last August. So it came as a shock when these same women and girls were ordered to leave, drawing tears, disbelief, anger. It was like losing a loved one. Everyone was crying, this young woman says. She was sent home, her dreams of becoming a doctor now uncertain. I cannot do anything. My future is ruined, she says. The realization that decades of progress is being wiped out broke the country's top broadcaster. The painful silences giving way to desperate pleas for change.
We call on the de facto authorities to respect all girls' rights to education and to open schools for all students without discrimination or further delay.
There's little hope the Taliban will reverse course.
The main reason they decided this is because they're misogynists and they don't believe in women's rights.
Canada is now being urged to live up to its claim it has a feminist foreign policy. One option, according to Human Rights Watch, could be for Ottawa to try to galvanize allies and coordinate a united approach to how the world deals with the Taliban.
I want to know what a feminist foreign policy means if it doesn't mean standing up and speaking out for Afghan women and girls at this moment.
At this moment, these young girls will not be allowed to go to high school. The promise of a new school year, now a reminder of their cruel new reality. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
There was a surprise announcement from Jamaica's Prime Minister in the middle of a royal visit. He says the country plans to cut ties with the monarchy and become independent.
We're moving on, and we intend to attain in short order our development goals and fulfill our true ambitions and destiny as an independent, developed, prosperous country.
The Prime Minister has been spending time with William and Kate on their visit to the Caribbean to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Their tour comes just 4 months after another former British colony, Barbados, became a republic. Now here in Canada, Jerry Dias, the former head of the country's largest private sector union, is now accused of ethics violations. Unifor laid out the results of its investigation into Dias. Thomas Deglet tells us what they found and talks about his own revelations.
For almost a decade, it seemed like he was everywhere. Jerry Dias showing up on TV screens doing interviews, traveling to Washington during NAFTA talks, and joining union members on the picket line. Dias became the face of Canadian organized labor. Now this.
We know that Unifor members will be upset by what you're learning today. So are we.
Unifor alleges Dias accepted $50,000 from an unnamed provider of COVID rapid tests and that he promoted that same firm to employers. Then on January 20th, Dias gave half the money to a Unifor member who in turn filed an ethics complaint and handed in the $25,000 to the union's secretary-treasurer.
The standard to prove a criminal offense is pretty high. Likely, if a criminal offense were investigated here, it would be either fraud or theft from one's employer.
Unifor didn't call police but hired an external investigator. Weeks later, Dias abruptly retired, citing health reasons, and wouldn't engage in the investigation.
That was the investigator's findings with what she had in the complaint. We're dealing with it as an isolated incident.
Dias issued a statement saying he's suffering from a debilitating sciatic nerve issue. My coping mechanism, he writes, has been painkillers, sleeping pills, and alcohol. These factors have impaired my judgment in recent months. Dias oversaw Unifor as it grew to become Canada's biggest private sector union, with more than 300,000 members.
Once it gets, so big, an event like this might have greater repercussions for many members, many different locals.
Even though Dias left his job as national president of Unifor, the union says he's still a member, and now the most they can do is remove him. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
Today, Canada took a big step into the age of electric vehicles. A massive factory planned for Windsor, Ontario, will make batteries for the vehicles, and 2,500 people will work there. Arsenault shows us a city in celebration, even though the business plan carries some risk.
This is transformational. It is massive.
The modernization of the automotive industry continues in the auto capital of Canada. LG Energy and automaker Stellantis, parent company of Chrysler, are partnering to build the country's first electric vehicle battery plant, a $5 billion investment.
This is the largest automotive manufacturing investment in the history of our province, and I'm sure it's probably the history of our country as well.
It includes hundreds of millions of federal and provincial dollars, but neither government will say exactly how much it invested. Ontario's auto industry has lost thousands of jobs in recent years. Stellantis' minivan plant in Windsor, once a 3-shift operation, will be cut to a single shift this summer. This announcement, a jolt of joy.
It's probably the biggest and the best investment that I've heard in my 57 years here. We're all excited.
The battery plant promises 2,500 jobs, ready by 2025, just as the local Stellantis assembly line finishes retooling to build an electric vehicle. It puts the automaker on track for its internal zero-emission targets, half of their vehicles electric by 2030.
This battery plant is going to supply across North America for us as one of 2 that we have visioned, and so we're very pleased. Based on location, it's a perfect spot.
Industry analysts say it's a bold move that carries risk in the face of American protectionism.
I think the hope is that the Buy America rhetoric will not get stronger. LG is taking a risk here.
Stellantis said it selected Windsor in part for the rich automotive history. The world's first ever minivan was made here 39 years ago. Now, it's the birthplace of Canada's electric vehicle industry. Arsenault, CBC News, Windsor, Ontario.
Police in Nova Scotia have charged 2 people accused of staging protests in front of the home of the province's chief medical officer of health. The 36 and 31-year-old are facing a number of charges, including harassment and intimidation of a health professional. One of them, Jeremy McKenzie, is the founder of Diagolon, which has been described as a white nationalist group. The protest in front of Dr. Strang's home started on Sunday and then continued for 2 more nights until the pair was arrested. There will be a bail hearing on Friday. A COVID vaccine for kids under the age of 6 has proved to be safe and effective. That is according to the manufacturer Moderna, which will soon seek approval for its use in Canada. Christine Birak asks the questions the parents want answered.
Not approved yet, but Moderna says its smaller dose COVID-19 vaccine is safe and it works in babies, toddlers, and preschoolers.
I think this is great news. It's another tool in our battle. It will help parents who are anxious about infections, and it will help kids who are anxious about getting sick.
In a press release, Moderna announced its vaccine study in children 6 months to under 6 years has successfully met its primary endpoint.
What they really showed is that the antibody response was as effective in this group as it was in adults.
Using 2 shots containing just a quarter of the dose given to adults, Moderna's early results show young children developed high levels of antibodies to fight the virus, which is where Pfizer's low-dose vaccine for kids fell short. The company since added a 3rd shot to its study, and results are expected in early April. While current shots only offer about 30 to 40% protection against becoming infected, doctors say the vaccines still protect people from becoming severely ill.
And I know parents have a lot of questions and anxiety, so it's nothing I think that will be imposed or forced in this age group, but I definitely would encourage it in this age group.
I'm excited about the vaccine.
Nina Janowski's had 2 children during COVID. It hasn't been easy. With restrictions lifted and COVID still circulating at high levels, she wants to do everything she can for her kids.
That 30%, that 40%, whatever it is, if it's going to give them some kind of protection as a parent, that's what I'm going to do.
Moderna says it's planning to submit its study data to health regulators worldwide, including here in Canada, within weeks. If Health Canada approves the vaccine, parents may be able to vaccinate their little ones by summer. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
As COVID restrictions lift, you may be navigating return to the office, but are you going willingly? A new survey by Angus Reid in partnership with CBC News found most Canadians currently working from home prefer to be doing it all or most of the time. Jacqueline Hansen has more on how crucial this workplace transition could prove to be.
In downtown Toronto, a wave of workers are returning to the office.
Actually, it's my first day today.
They're encouraging everybody to come back.
Still, it's nothing like pre-pandemic times when you could get swept up by the current of commuters. And it may never be, since many companies aren't bringing everyone back to the office full time.
I will be in a hybrid role, so a few days a week and the other days back in my slippers and PJ pants.
Leaving the comfort of working from home completely could be a deal breaker for some people. A new survey by the Angus Reid Institute in partnership with CBC News found 1/3 said if they were mandated back to the office full time, they'd consider looking for a new job. And nearly a quarter said they'd quit immediately.
Even if they don't leave, do you think it's a good thing to have 1 in 5 of your people staying with you for golden handcuffs and hating you?
This researcher says there's no single solution for every workplace.
Start talking to your people. Stop pretending it's one and done here, that there is some magical plan. Ooh, you can implement it and it'll be a miracle.
It's what we would call a candidates market.
This recruiter says in-office jobs are the most difficult to fill right now.
Flexibility is what is really the most important, perhaps more than increase in pay.
At Wave, a financial services firm in Toronto, coming to the office has perks.
Stunning patio with gorgeous views of the city.
Yeah, it's meant to be an environment that's really comfortable, good for working, creative thinking.
Still, hybrid is the new normal here, and no one will be forced to come back.
I think if we did put a mandate into place, we would lose people, and I think we should. I think people have proven that they can be efficient at home, they can get work done, they can be trusted.
Putting the choice in employees' hands to stay or go. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
CBC News has uncovered new allegations against Alberta Premier Jason Kenney linked to his successful campaign in 2017 to lead the province's new United Conservative Party. Carolyn Dunn shows us how court documents link Kenney more closely than ever to the alleged use of a kamikaze candidate to smear his main opponent and then drop out.
Summer 2017. A cast of political operatives gathered to put the finishing touches on the plan to ensure a solid Jason Kenney victory in his bid to lead the UCP. It was Jeff Callaway's house, former Wild Rose Party president, and the man ready to torpedo his own leadership bid for Kenney. Tonight, new allegations from 2 of the men present, taken directly from transcripts of their interviews with elections investigators probing the Callaway campaign. Cam Davies, a communications expert, and Hardeel Happy Man, a political power broker in Calgary's South Asian communities. Political scientist Dwayne Bratt has read the interviews.
They've got him meeting with Callaway and, more importantly, discussing money. This was carefully orchestrated from the beginning.
Davies told investigators Jeff's campaign was to run kind of a dark horse campaign. Jason Kenney's negative numbers were too negative to be able to start slinging against anybody. So Callaway's job was to attack Kenney's closest political rival, Brian Jean. And according to Cam Davies, a political strategist with the Callaway campaign, Jason Kenney was delighted. He was laughing and drinking all night. He was very appreciative of the fact that Callaway was willing to do this. Davies quotes Kenney saying, "I don't want to know the details. You guys coordinate it with my team." It turns out running a sham campaign isn't against electoral law, but funding it with irregular donations is. So investigators wanted to know where that money came from and who knew about it. According to organizer Happy Man, also present that night, money was of little concern. He first quoted Jason Kenney as telling the group, "Don't worry, funds will come." Separately, Cam Davies corroborated the group discussed money with Kenney present. "Don't worry about it, it will be handled, we'll raise money."
I went to seek his endorsement.
Those accounts, which have not been tested in court, are in stark contrast to what Kenney has claimed about his involvement.
I had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever about how they financed their campaign.
It didn't seem plausible.
Political scientist Dwayne Bratt says the two interviews contradict Kenney's denial.
Now you've got two people, independent of one another, saying that Kenney either said money's not the problem or was in the room when money was being discussed.
So we need a platform, I believe.
Certainly, Jason Kenney was grateful for Jeff Callaway's sacrifice. When he left the race, Kenney presented him with a bottle of Alberta Dark Horse whiskey. The political metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. Jason Kenney's office told CBC News they weren't familiar with the newly discovered documents, and his previous statements on the matter stand. More than $200,000 in elections-related fines have been levied in the case. The RCMP continues what it calls a complex investigation into the funding of Callaway's campaign, as well as voter identity theft in the same leadership race. The Premier's office won't say whether Kenney has been interviewed or asked to be interviewed in either investigation. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
In Washington, D.C., an emotional scene on the third day of Supreme Court nomination hearings.
You got here how every black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done by being, like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in heels.
If confirmed by the Senate, Ketanji Brown Jackson will become the first black woman on the Supreme Court. The hearings wrap up tomorrow. A political trailblazer is being remembered in the U.S. tonight. Madeleine Albright has died of cancer at the age of 84.
I, Madeleine Corbell Albright.
In 1997, Madeleine Albright became the first woman U.S. Secretary of State.
This is a dream come true. Actually, a dream I never thought I could have.
She'd previously served as U.S. ambassador to the UN. Known for her tough approach, she fought hard for military intervention in Kosovo and famously called out Cuba for shooting down civilian aircraft.
This is not cojones. This is cowardice.
Born in Prague, she was ultimately a refugee, her family first fleeing the Nazis, then communism. In 2012, she was awarded the Medal of Freedom. She became an inspiration for generations of women, even breaking into pop culture.
You're right. Once again, Madeleine Albright.
She's being remembered tonight as brilliant, funny, and fierce. In Joe Biden's words, a force for goodness, grace, and decency, and for freedom. Parents using surrogate mothers in Ukraine are now dealing with a frightening situation.
That must be hard, though, to stay calm.
Very hard, but we are trying.
Coming up, we speak with parents waiting helplessly while their new baby remains in Ukraine. But first, NATO is taking more measures to deter Russia, but is it enough? I speak with two people who have sat at the table with NATO members. Next. Welcome back. Tomorrow, leaders of NATO, that 30-member military alliance, are meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, thanks to an old adversary, Russia. If you were to ask the Kremlin, one of the reasons for all this destruction is NATO.
The signing of the North Atlantic Treaty had...
The Western Alliance was originally formed to hold back Soviet Russia. Article 5 of its constitution stating an attack on one is an attack on all. But the Cold War ended, and NATO kept expanding eastward with assurances it was purely defensive. But in 1999, NATO bombed Yugoslavia into submission, cheered on, incidentally, by then-Senator Joe Biden.
They either yield or they get crushed. Just decimate them. Flat out, just decimate them.
That NATO campaign, part of Vladimir Putin's justification for his land grabs in Ukraine. He has long viewed the growth of NATO and other Western institutions in Europe as a threat to Russia's influence. But the bigger NATO has become, the more it's had issues with unity and focus. And ironically, the man who's doing more right now to restore both is Vladimir Putin. Joining us now to discuss what NATO could do next and the implications of that is Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, and Rose Gottemoeller, former Deputy Secretary General of NATO. So Ivo and Rose, thank you for joining us. We saw today Stoltenberg's proposal, you know, the 4 new battle groups, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia. Can you pull back for us, Rose, a little bit? What is the implication of that?
I think it's really a super step by NATO because the 4 battle groups in the Baltic states and Poland were formed after the egregious seizure of Crimea in 2014. But we were always a bit tentative, in my view, about Southeastern Europe. But this is a sign that NATO is stepping forward now to also put in place the same kind of deterrence presence in Southeast Europe in these important states who are right on the borderlands of Ukraine, of course, but also close to the Black Sea and Russia. So very important step from my perspective.
Ivo, what's your sense of how that will land in Russia?
Oh, they won't like it, but you know, you can't invade a country, bomb cities and civilians to the extent the Russians have, and have much of a say about how NATO should defend NATO territory. I think it's high time that these battle groups are deployed. I think it's a right step. I think it's a first step because we really need to start thinking about not just deterrence, but also defense. And defense requires more capability in the Baltic states and Poland, all along the eastern flank. Russia has demonstrated that it's willing to use force, and NATO needs to demonstrate that if it does so, it won't succeed.
Rose, one of the things I know about you is that, you know, part of your responsibility with the National Security Council was assessing nuclear threat reduction in countries like Russia. So I'm curious what your assessment is of the actual nuclear threat from Russia.
Well, let me just say this is quite a tragedy because we worked very well with Russia from the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, well into this period and up to about 2014 and the invasion of Crimea. We worked very closely with them to ensure that the breakup of the Soviet nuclear arsenal did not result in nuclear weapons falling into terrorist hands or into hands of, the pariah states in the world. Nowadays, however, Putin is rattling the nuclear saber, and he is doing so in a way that is highly irresponsible.
We have heard sort of the suggestions from NATO, like ease up on the saber rattling Russia. But I'm curious, Eva, when you hear that sentence, what is the or else that goes with that warning to Russia?
Well, I would hope that we're going to spend a significant amount of time tomorrow at NATO headquarters talking about both the risk of escalation. Nuclear weapons is one risk. It's, of course, the ultimate risk, but a lot of talk from the Russians also on chemical weapons, a lot of talk about biological agents perhaps being released. They've been throwing around all kinds of spurious allegations about U.S.-funded bioweapons labs, which is a completely false allegation of what is happening in Ukraine, but suggests the possibility that these weapons may be used. And we need to think through our response, because our response needs to be serious. It needs to be real. And I would argue it needs to be military. there is a line that we're trying to keep between helping Ukraine defend itself and not having direct engagement between NATO and Russia forces. But as the Russians move up the escalation ladder and start using unconventional weapons in war, we need to think about whether that line is in the right place. It may be time to at least let the Russians know that we contemplate on supporting the Ukrainians more directly with our own forces if something like this were to happen.
And Rose, we're about a month in now. Is there a tension point in this war that you are watching in particular, something that worries you the most?
Well, I think the fact that the Russian forces have performed so badly in this war does lead us all to worry that Vladimir Putin is getting backed into a corner, and he may react with these weapons of mass destruction that we've been talking about just now. I have to say I disagree a bit with Ivo on this matter. I do think that NATO should continue as its top strategic objective to avoid a general war in Europe that could expand into a global conflict. I think NATO needs to do everything it can to avoid that outcome. That means, however, being prepared to help the Ukrainians defend and mitigate against any kind of weapon of mass destruction attack, particularly in the case of a massive chemical attack, where we have a lot of tools in our toolkit to respond and to help them to recover from such an attack.
One last thought, this is a day where, the world lost Madeleine Albright. And I know that this is someone who you both worked with. And I'm just curious, I have a feeling she'd be overturning tables with rage at what is happening in the world. What are your thoughts for her today, Rose?
Madeleine Albright was one of my great mentors, and I always look to her for, indeed, that tough lady who never backed down when she had the guys staring her in the face. So I've taken her as a model for my own efforts in life, and Godspeed, Madeleine, is all I can say. And
Ivo, last word to you.
Madeleine Albright represents everything that's great about America. She was a refugee, an immigrant in a country made up of immigrants. She represented the values that this country has upheld, democracy, freedom, human rights. She was a fierce fighter for those values, could not stand people who in any way attacked democracy, freedom, and human rights, whether it's Slobodan Milosevic or Saddam Hussein or Vladimir Putin. And we miss her voice already in a time when freedom is once again under attack by the very people that she has opposed her entire life.
All right, Ivo Daalder, Rose Gottemoeller, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
4 weeks into this war, horrors are still mounting in Ukraine. Among the people trapped there, hiding from daily explosions, are the babies of foreign parents, including Canadians. They're all born to surrogate mothers in Ukraine, one of the few countries that allows surrogacy for foreigners. Ioana Miliota shows us the daring efforts underway to keep the babies safe and to get them out.
The guns, the dramatic music. This could be a scene out of an action movie. But this video is real, released by a surrogacy agency to reassure terrified parents that their babies, trapped in a war zone, are safe. The babies are all born to Ukrainian surrogates. Their parents are all foreigners, shut out by the war. So every day, babies are brought here to a bomb shelter in Kyiv, where they wait to be rescued by people like Brent Tucker.
As long as there's babies that need our help, we intend to be here.
Tucker and his team are former U.S. Special Operations military who work for a child rescue organization called the Sentinel Foundation. Loaded with baby supplies, they've been making treacherous journeys in Ukraine for parents who can't.
Most parents, understandably so, don't want to go into a war zone to pick up their kids. So there are times we're managing the complete logistics part of it. It doesn't matter to us. We'll pick up one, we'll pick up 100.
Every story is different, and every one of them is filled with fear. Jagan Shishon wasn't sure he would be holding his baby in his arms.
I suppose that was the biggest fear, just having our daughter alone in that environment. That would be unbearable.
His baby surrogate fled Kyiv to give birth in a safer place in Ukraine nearly 2 weeks ago. With the help of a nonprofit agency, Shishon and his wife picked up their daughter Olivia in Poland shortly after she was born.
It was so difficult, and there was so many hurdles to overcome. I do feel enormous happiness that we were able to do that, and that we'll be able to give Olivia, a safe and happy life. But I suppose there's a juxtaposition between, our personal feelings of happiness, but then also, what's unfolding there.
Little baby sleeping.
A network of volunteers got Olivia out and are driving other babies to parents waiting in bordering countries.
Who's going to be the nanny for this evacuation?
Sam Everingham is coordinating the evacuations. He runs Growing Families, a non-profit surrogacy organization. More than 100 couples, including nearly a dozen Canadian ones, have reached out for his help to get their babies to safety.
There's over 900 Ukrainian women carrying babies for foreigners right now. We're only in touch with a fraction of those. So we're dealing with surrogates and babies spread out over huge areas, and being able to bring them to safety is tough.
Waiting for their newborns has been excruciating for the parents, he says.
You put all your energy and hope into having this child, and then this comes up, a war comes up, and something you never would have expected. And then it suddenly happens overnight, and it takes your breath away.
We just want our kid out. That's all we want.
The voice you just heard is that of a Canadian father who only wants to be identified by his first name, Faison, out of concern for his baby's safety. His son is among these babies at the bunker in Kyiv. Faison and his wife are in Poland, waiting and hoping their child can be rescued in time.
I don't really want to push them because they're already doing a big favor by taking care of all those small babies. So I'm not sure how long they will keep it. God forbid if there's a full-scale invasion of the city. Of course they're going to save their own lives rather than take care of somebody else's baby. That scares me.
But for now, the babies are being cared for by exhausted nannies who refuse to abandon them. Olga Kuch is one of them. We spoke to her through a translator.
Of course we are scared. Everything depends on us, and we need to be calm because the babies feel the stress right away.
That must be hard though to stay calm.
Напевно, дуже важко бути спокійним.
Важко. Ми стараємось.
Very hard, but we are trying.
As for Tucker, after we talked to him, he was heading to Kyiv to try to rescue the Canadian baby whose father we spoke to. He's not fazed by the risks, but as a parent himself admits, these are tough operations.
Do you think of your own kids when you're rescuing these children?
All the time. I got 3 little girls and a little boy, and if they look remotely like any of my kids, it's hard not to imagine that kid and that parent and the situation they're in, and how important it is to make this happen.
Getting these babies safely home in the middle of a war, it's a daunting task, and for so many parents, still an agonizing wait. Joanna Rumaliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
So it's now Thursday morning in Ukraine. It could be a big day for Faison. That's the Canadian dad you just heard from. The rescue team is hoping to reach his son today and get the baby out of Ukraine. After the break, Canada's men's soccer team takes the world by storm.
Alphonso Davies keeps it himself! Goal!
Why everyone is talking about their performance. Plus, one men's unusual close counter. Stay with us. Welcome back. Canada's men's soccer team is on the verge of going where it hasn't been since 1986, the World Cup. And as Jamie Strachan shows us, it's drawing attention from beyond our borders.
Corner kick. Swings it in, near post, headed away, and it's in! It's in! Canada has got in front, 2-1!
Since its one and only World Cup nearly 40 years ago, Canada has wandered in the soccer wilderness. A win Thursday in Costa Rica would change all of that.
Alphonso Davies keeps it himself! Goal!
The team has dazzled through World Cup qualifying, going undefeated through 11 matches, punctuated by magical moments like Alphonso Davies' goal last October in Toronto.
I think Fonzie's goal against Panama, I think it got the country to believe that we can do this. And when that belief's there, you stop believing anything can happen.
Before this unprecedented run, little was expected from Canada's men's side. That's changed.
This is easily the most talented Canadian team, ever. I mean, Canada has never had this kind of quality and depth at every position. They've never had players playing at the very top level of European club football.
Beyond hardcore supporters, casual fans are latching on to this team's success. Tickets to home games, including this Sunday in Toronto, sold out in hours.
We talk about John Herman. Think about how smart this man is. Think about how tactically brilliant he was.
Even international media like ESPN is suddenly taking notice of this team and its charismatic head coach.
Every man knows what's in front of them. They're in the front row seat. Their hands are on the steering wheel. They can do this.
And getting to Qatar is just the beginning for a team looking to write a new chapter for Canadian men's soccer.
I think it's the team that no one wants to play. I mean, and as far as going Qatar and just being happy to be there, I mean, that's the furthest thing from John Herdman's mind.
Once an unfathomable thought, but not anymore. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
All right, next, a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with an unexpected feathered friend. That very rare moment is our moment after this. keep an eye on that beautiful eagle because it's part of our moment tonight, which comes to us from New Brunswick. Danny Ward is a Mi'kmaq elder in New Brunswick. He just came meters away from this bald eagle. So he caught the rare encounter on video. What a sight it was. And tonight, it's our moment.
I got a call from my cousin, Francis, that there was an eagle sitting in the backyard. So I went over and I seen the eagle sitting there on a stump. I approached it as close as I could and I proceeded to light a smudge, sage smudge. I burned that and I prayed a little bit for the eagle. I offered some tobacco for his spirit and then I drummed a song. And it was an eagle honor song. Then I started talking to it in my language, Mi'kmaq. And it starts to slowly make its way down to almost where I am. I was amazed how big the eagle was, especially when it started to spread its wings. The eagle is very important in our culture, in the Mi'kmaq culture, and most Native cultures. To have that honor of being that close to it was so awesome. They just filled me with joy.
So Danny said he was both impressed but also a little worried, especially when the eagle didn't fly. So he called the Ministry of Natural Resources. They came, they looked after the eagle. They're testing it for avian flu because they are a bit worried it'll take a few weeks before they find out if it's okay. That is the National for March 23rd. Good night.